each one of you this morning. I was taking part of the Sunday school class. I had to think of where Peter and those were on the Mount of Transfiguration, and they said, "Why don't we build 3 temples? 3 temples here," and just stayed.
To do that.
These modern conveniences, I just have like a child. They don't know when to remain silent. Some of you may have seen this before. Maybe a little bit of an introduction on what I expect to speak about today. I trust each one of you in your Sunday school classes, especially as adults, we're blessed. Lowell did a terrific job in getting us to think deeply on what's in that lesson. Challenge. For this morning's message, I would like to look at 2 chapters in 1 Samuel, 16 and 17. And I had listened to a message about a week and a half ago, and in that message, the challenge of what I see in the story of David and Goliath, the spiritual sense, the physical part that was in that story caught my attention, and that's what I would like to bring out this morning. Part of it feels like it's a children's class, and I'm afraid I'll lose you. It's a well-known story. You know all the details. And I would like to kind of go through verse by verse to some extent in chapter 16 and into 17, not taking the complete verse by verse, but pretty well. So if you want to open your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 16. I think we all are familiar with the setting of Israel, the struggle that was there with Saul not being obedient to what God had told him or showed him in his position as leadership. And with that, the prior chapter before this, Samuel had come to him and had told him that the Lord had taken the kingdom away from him and that he was on his own. Also had a spirit, an evil spirit that was troubling him. He went to a witch to try to find direction because God was not responding to him. And that's all because of choices and decisions that he had made up unto this point. Now we have Samuel coming to anoint David king of Israel in the first part of chapter 16. As we go through this, try to follow through with seeing the carnality, humanity of the situation, and also seeing the providence of God. Let's start in chapter 16, verse 1. And the Lord said unto Samuel, How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thy horn with oil and go, and I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, Take an heifer with thee, and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And he called Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show thee what thou wilt do, and thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee. Here is where we first see, the next verse here is where we see humanity and our ability, our thoughts start to enter in. Well, maybe it was even earlier here where Samuel expressed his fear of Saul. God had just told him what to do. And what more did he need? But he expressed the fear, knowing that if Saul found out that he anointed another man to be king in his stead, he would probably lose his life. If Saul would have known who it was, he would have tried to eradicate that person as well. And we know that later on in the story, he did try extensively, put a lot of effort in. A lot of cost was put into that. But, and then we see in verse 4, Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, Comest thou peaceably? And he said, Peaceably. I am come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourselves, and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons, and called them to the sacrifice. I'm not sure how all that unfolded. It seems like somewhere along the line, it was just Samuel, Jesse, and his sons. But at this point, it seems like all Israel, that whoever wanted to, was invited to come to the sacrifice. And in that sacrifice, Samuel sanctified Jesse and his sons. It doesn't seem like they were even present. But as they came in, verse 6, and it came to pass, they were come, that he looked on Eliab, and said, Surely the Lord's... Surely the Lord's anointed is before me. Just going by physical appearance. It doesn't give us an indication how he appeared. It does of David later on, but not of Eliab. But something about his stature, the way he carried himself, something was about him that when he came in, Samuel thought he would make a good king. God said, no, that's not the one. Verse 7, he says, Look not on his countenance, nor his height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not man, as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab, and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. And then Jesse made Shamu pass by, and he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this. And again Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. As far as Samuel knew, it was all of his sons. And the Lord hadn't chosen any of them. It doesn't indicate, did Samuel question his communication with God at that point or not? It seemed like he was confident in what God had been telling him up to this point in the 7 sons. And he said, and Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. I'm not sure, was David in a responsibility where his dad didn't feel like he needed to hire someone to take his place? Didn't expect David to be the called one? I'm not sure why David was left out to take care of the sheep. But at this point, Samuel said, Send and fetch him, that they were not going to sit down until he came hither. Verse 12, he sent and brought him in, and now he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Again, probably the least expected of the 7 or 8 sons of Jesse. But God had a plan. God had already chosen David before he ever talked to Samuel. It seemed like David was already in preparation. He was in boot camp when he was taking care of the sheep. God was working all those things out. Man didn't know anything about it. So in verse 13, Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. To a large extent, David went right back to his routine walk of life. He went back to his sheep, taking care of them. I don't know how many people would have known that he had been anointed. I assume all of his family knew that he had been anointed. But otherwise, life returned to normal. Verse 14, and the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said unto him, Behold, now an evil spirit from the Lord troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants, which are before thee, to seek out a man who is a cunning player of the harp. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit of God is upon, and it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit of God is upon thee, and he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. And Saul said unto his servants, Provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. I think for time's sake, we'll just paraphrase some of that in knowing that that took place. Again, the providence of God working behind the scenes. David is a shepherd boy. He had no knowledge of what was taking place in the palace or in the king's domain. Saul was the first king that Israel ever had, so there wasn't even a pattern really to follow. It was just Saul being the first king, and now David being anointed the second king. He's a shepherd. He's a youth. Not a lot of insight or understanding, but God is providing that ability for David to know, and he puts him into the palace with the king. I don't know how many people were coming in and out of the palace, but if you read this portion of the chapter, you would think that the next part of the chapter, when David came into the camp and was taken to Saul, Saul would have recognized him. But you will notice Saul never recognized him. He didn't know this was the man that had played the harp, that helped him to come through his depression or whatever was there of that evil spirit. I don't know how much time was here between the time he was anointed until the time of war in chapter 17. But David was right in his presence and played the harp and helped him. I think, doesn't say so, but I think David took things to heart. He understood and he's seen some things there that were an aid to him later on in life. Okay, then we go into chapter 17. And we can see what's taking place here. The Philistines seemed like an ongoing thorn in the flesh for the Israelites. And they came over and they set up a war, or were causing conflict with the Israelites. And they pitched their two armies. It says on two mountains. From what I understand, it wasn't really mountains, but rather maybe large hills in that area. And in the process, Israel, as a complete nation, was confident enough that it says that they set up the valley and set the battle in array in verse 2, last part. Set the battle in array against the Philistines. It seemed like they were confident enough to go to war against the Philistines with the numbers as they were, not necessarily in their favor. But as they came into that setting, going to war, here's where Goliath came out of the other camp. They didn't expect that. And I don't know, maybe reading between the lines, but you've probably already been in situations where you felt comfortable in your position because of those that were around you. But if you were called to take a stand by yourself, all of a sudden your confidence was gone. And it seems like that's what happened in this case here. They were confident as a nation, as a group of men, to face the Philistines. They were bolstered by each other's, comradeship, working together. They were willing to go to fight against the Philistines. But when Goliath came out and changed the scenario and said, well, instead of us all fighting against each other, let's just have a one-on-one, not so much bloodshed. You just provide a man. And at that point, the Israelites lost their confidence. No one was willing to stand up and to acknowledge on who they were representing. They started to look at things in their human eyes, their human mind, their understanding, and recognizing their need. And they didn't have what it took anymore. Now, I would like to depict a little bit, I know we know the story, but just to go through there and look at the formidable man that Goliath presented. He was roughly 9'9" in height. That is almost 4 feet taller than I am. If you can imagine, this man, I expect, walked out there to war. And you look at what all he had on. He had a helmet of brass, which I don't know exactly what all, but I'm assuming it covered pretty well his head. And if you know anything about brass, it's probably getting towards some of the heaviest metal there is. He had a coat of mail, and it does tell us that one weighed 126 pounds. And I don't really have anything to compare that thing with, but if you think of a bag of concrete, those are 80 pounds occasionally. Most of them are 40, so they're at a size where us normal men can handle them. You take a bag of salt for the softener. Those come in 40-pound bags. How many of you carry 3 at a time? That's 120 pounds if they're 40 pounds. This guy came walking out ready for battle, just wearing a coat of mail that weighed 126 pounds, plus the helmet, plus his brass greaves that were in front across his shins to protect him there. He had a javelin slung across his shoulder yet. It doesn't really give us a size on that. But we know that the spear, the sword that he had, there was none like it in all Israel. Later on in David's experience, when he took that sword from the priest when he was leaving for fear of his life, he was carrying that. And then he had a spear. And according to the measurements and things, that spear is pretty well to the weight and size of Goliath's spear. And I know some of you have a little experience with that, but in the past we had that here at church at the picnic, and I think some of you had the chance of trying to throw it and to see how far you could throw it. None of you looked like a threat to me. But in the hands of Goliath, that was a weapon to be dealt with. In doing a little study, it said it gives us the size of the head of the spear, but it said in being a balanced spear, they expect that it might have had a weight at the back yet to balance it, to make it fly correctly when he threw it. The head of that spear is about 15 pounds. Quite a weapon to be able to throw to where it would do its devastation when it got to the target. Now, this man had just walked out into battle every day. He was ready for it. He didn't, I don't read it that he sat down and rested, but I certainly would have, long before I got there, because of the weight that he was carrying just in what he wore to protect himself. He was a fortress, a walking fortress, in all the garb that he had on for his protection. Sometimes when I think of Goliath and David, I think it was at least an advantage to David because the bigger he got, the bigger the target. But this target was covered with brass almost completely. Where was there supposed to be a weak point for David to even make a target? But that was not an issue to God. Then we look at verse 8. As he came out there, and he said, he stood and he cried to the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are you come out to set up the battle in array? Am I not a Philistine, and ye servants of Saul? And I look at that thing, and we talk about propaganda in our news today. I think if you dissect this a little bit, this is propaganda. This is said in a way to make an impression in a negative way on the people of Israel, in that thing of saying that I am a Philistine and you're a servant. A belittling kind of a comment to try to cause them to fear in who he was and who they were. Verse 10 says, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight. A challenge that he wasn't scared of their God. He defied them. Verse 11, and Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine and were dismayed and greatly feared, greatly afraid. What did they see? What caused them to be dismayed? We all know that Saul was probably the tallest man in their armed forces. He was the king. He was a head taller than anyone else. So if most of the men would have been an average, I don't know what the average size of us men are in here, but let's say if it's 5'10", he would have roughly been a foot taller from the shoulders upward. So 5'10", he's 6'10". Pretty good sized man. But even Saul, being a little bit closer, be able to look at Goliath eye to eye, was in fear, dismay. We look at the transformation of what Saul tried in his ability to deal with the situation. He didn't have a connection with God anymore. It gives us the story of what was offered in verse 25 to the man who would take care of Goliath. And he gives us three things. And I would expect, I don't know, the Bible doesn't tell us, but I expect that when this situation came up, Saul probably said the first one, I'll make you a rich man, whoever is willing to take care of this opposition that we have here. And nobody responded. And with time, he added to it. He said, I'll make you a prince. I will allow you to marry my daughter. I will make you a prince in the kingdom. And no one responded. And he said, on top of those, I will make your father's house tax-free. How many of us would have jumped? Oh, I maybe shouldn't have raised a hand on that one. How many of us would be like to be tax-free today? Those three things, and no one responded. Saul was looking desperate, willing to see what he could do. How many of you have been at the airport and they ask for someone to be willing to step off the plane because it's overbooked, and they keep adding to it and adding to it? How much would it have taken for someone in the Jewish kingdom to be willing to rise to the challenge of facing Goliath? I don't think there was enough in the kingdom to give those men the courage that it was taken to face Goliath head on with the challenge that was placed. There was not enough reward there. The fear and the dismay that was there, their spiritual relationship with the God that they were serving and that they represented is where the failure had come in. Now we see David coming into the situation. And by the way, this thing of stepping up the reward, if you remember, Goliath did this for 40 days by the time David arrived. So roughly 80 times, these men of Israel heard that thing of, give me a man that we may fight. You are Saul's slaves, and I am a Philistine. 80 times they heard that. And then David is sent by his father to take some food to his brothers, and also looks like a blessing to the captains, some cheese to the captains as well. And upon his arrival, the army of Israel was moving out, again, going out to set to some degree in array. I don't know that I understand all those things, but again, Goliath made his deal that he wanted to make with them, and David heard it for the first time. Verse 24, and when all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. The 80th time, his response is still the same. They had gone out, they still fled. As Goliath made his declaration or his deal that he wanted to make with them. Verse 25, they were communicating with David here, and he says, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make him his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David didn't make one comment about the size, the formidable appearance of Goliath. He noticed what he had done. He had defied the armies of the living God. Stepping down to verse 28, his oldest brother called him out. Said, I know you. I know why you're here. David's response was, Am I not here for a cause? Didn't Dad send me? Am I not here because of what Dad had told me to do? It wasn't that he had just come out of his own curiosity and ignorance, as Eliab had indicated here. But again, it was providence. Was it not? In their conversation there with some of the soldiers, David's comments were taken to Saul, and Saul responded and asked that they would bring him to him. Verse 33, and Saul said to David, verse 32, and David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. No fear, no dismay. Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and a man of war, and he a man of war from his youth. All this armor that he was wearing was second nature to Goliath. It didn't cause him to feel clumsy or anything. He was prepared, he trained, he was ready to use it. Come what may, unto death. Saul could see the youth in David's face, the inexperience. He said, You're not able to go. Later on, Saul referred to him as a stripling. Here he calls him a youth. The next couple verses there, David shares what took place when he was taking care of the sheep. And it's not like David was saying these things trying to lift himself up with his bootstrap in the fact that he had killed a lion and a bear, delivered the sheep out of their mouth, saved them. But he was bringing out the point that the same God that did that for him would also help him with the situation that was at hand here. Verse 37, David gives God the glory. Just for those situations that took place with the sheep. It says, David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of the Philistine. Do you think some of Saul's history went through his mind? Their first deliverance when he was anointed to be king was a major, major victory, even with opposition in the camp. I wonder if Saul did not see and know where David's strength lay. His confidence, he could see it. And he knew. He says, go and the Lord be with you, the end of verse 37. But just like us, we have to deal with our carnal nature, don't we? The very next verse, Saul changes back. He just got done telling him, go and the Lord be with you. He reverts back to man's strength. Now remember, David is referred to as a youth, later referred to as a stripling. Saul is a head taller than anyone else in the kingdom. What was Saul thinking? That he would think in the next section here that David could wear his armor. You think of human wisdom, looking and trying to make ways to take care of myself, taking care of the situation, making sure that David doesn't take the whole army of Israel into slavery to the Philistines. It says, and David, verse 38, and Saul armed David with his armor and put the helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail, the same thing that Goliath had. Maybe not quite the size, but the same thing. But it was made for Saul. It wasn't made for David. It was not his size. And David girded the sword upon his armor and essayed to go, for he had not proved it. There's something about that the training that becomes second nature. I remember as a young boy, my brother took me deer hunting. And I think my brother was a seasoned hunter. I was still in training. I was learning. And I knew if a deer would see you, they would run because of fear. So the idea was to hold still so they wouldn't see you. And it was a little later in the morning. My brother came over to where I was sitting in a different woods across the road. And he came over and we talked a little bit and then walked down around the corner, past the cornfield a little bit to where you couldn't see where I had been sitting. We went around the corner of the cornfield and looked down past the side of the woods where they had been doing some shooting earlier in the morning. And as we were done and coming back through to go home, about 25 feet away from where I was sitting was probably one of the nicest deer I've ever seen. And I just froze. Like, wait till he looks away and then I'll shoot. He was looking right at us. Beautiful deer. In the time that I froze, my brother had 2 shots. He was seasoned. He was prepared. And I look at that in David's setting here with Saul's armor not being prepared. It wasn't second nature. It was cumbersome. Even if it did do the job of protecting him, it was a weight to him. He wasn't prepared to use it. And David essayed to go. He said, I haven't tried it. The same God that had delivered him from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear. He trusted in it. He knew that was where his strength was. in closing, I would like to drop down and look at verse 46 and 47. Just the last part of verse 46. David said, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Verse 47, and all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hands. What made the difference is the question. What made the difference in David's viewpoint, in what he's seen on that battlefield? Not once did David make a reference to the formidable man that was on the Philistine side. Why did not one of the men of Israel see that as David did? What's changed David's view from the trained, seasoned warriors that were in the Jewish camp? I look at the way that David went out to that battle. And again, the Bible doesn't tell us. But you read there where David went down into the stream and picked those 5 stones up. As I would think of that situation, I would be trembling. I'm glad we're not called to that kind of warfare. But it seems like David had a confidence about him, assurance. I think of Adam and Eve as they walked in the cool of the day. David walked through the brook. He picked 5 smooth stones up and put them in his scrip, in his bag, and then moved on. As you think of David's experience out by the sheep, David had a relationship with God. I think he was on top. I think he had his morning devotion. Just recently, communication with a friend of mine, I thanked him for a gift that was given me for my birthday, and I had used it that morning, and I just thought I would share that I had used it. It was a blessing and saved me some time. And in response, he said, he's glad it helped out and that it saved me some time and that I therefore could have more time for the kingdom. I read that message and I thought for a while, and I said, what does he mean by more time for the kingdom? Is there a difference? Do I have time for the kingdom and time for myself as a Christian? I started to think about that, and I messaged back, and I said, I just want you to know that I am actually full-time employed in the kingdom. It's a little funny, but that thought has not left me. Is that not what made the difference between David and the men of Israel? What is important? If I don't have time to reach around, what do I have time for? I don't know what you're facing. What are your giants? What would you class as things that you are concerned about today, tomorrow, maybe in the future? There's all kinds of things that we face. Sickness, pain, has a way of driving us to our knees with pain. Maybe a family member has called you out like Eliab did. Loss of a loved one, an aging body that doesn't perform. Maybe it's called to responsibility as a young father, as a father of a teen. Maybe it's a heavy schedule that you didn't ask for, a broken relationship. Maybe it's just answering the phone again. We have the modern conveniences of having caller ID. Sometimes we know who's calling, sometimes we don't. Do we fear answering? Maybe it's somebody that needs time. Personal witnessing. Maybe it's answering the door. We know who's there. Or we expect them, we know what they want. I don't know what your challenges are, what you fear, but they are real. Do I know who I represent? Paul said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and dominions. The same challenges that were taking place here in this setting. This was a national thing, but I can see the everyday walk of life that you and I are facing. The challenges that are there of being fully committed and seeing them through God's eyes rather than mine, rather than being dismayed and fearing moving forward, rather than trying to avoid those challenges, those giants that are there. I move forward in knowing that the same God that had provisions made and a plan for David back when he was taking care of the sheep, anointed him for king, took him to the battlefield, took him to the kingdom, to learn how to perform in the palace. God had all those things in mind. He's the same yesterday and today, for you and for me. I don't have to fear those things. It's when I take my eyes off and I start to focus on my abilities that I lose heart. Zechariah 4:6. The word of the Lord came unto Zerubbabel, saying, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit. You remember when Samuel anointed David, it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. I think that makes a difference in our everyday walk of life. That still small voice, it gives us confidence. We can trust in it. Faithful is he who hath called you, who also will do it. Song that we sing sometimes. He didn't bring us this far to leave us. Those provisions that he had for yesterday are the stepping stone we need for today to give us faith for tomorrow.